If I could get a motion on our minutes. Minutes have been motioned and approval. Without objection, the minutes will stand. Under planning tonight, we have two items on final read, which we will not cover. Under resolutions, council office, we have some appointments to our park board, which we will not read into the record. If you'll just continue to scan with me. And if you have questions, please hit your light. Under economic development, we'll note item F is a short-term rental application, which I will assume came in prior to the moratorium. Caleb, can you confirm that for me, please?
I'm not sure what that is on the agenda there. That's an application that was submitted in 2018, was approved by City Council, and has since expired. They're no longer operating. So I don't know how
this
it got
item
on
you're
there.
telling me should not be on our agenda.
As far as I know. Like I said, I don't know how it got there. So
I'm getting all kinds of, I have no ideas, which is a little
disconcerting.
awkward, but
Yes, sir.
Caleb, if that's what you're telling me and the city attorney is shaking her head as well, then I'm going to ask for that item to be removed before 6 p.m.
Yes, sir.
And if council does not have any objection to that, Councilman Henderson. Hang on. Councilwoman Hill jumped in front of you.
So
As she should. I'm sorry.
I think to follow procedure, I mean, normally when something is on our current
Publish, we
agenda,
take action.
we'll at least take action to withdraw it. I think I would feel more comfortable doing that than just removing it, just to follow
I was
proper
going to chalk it up
procedure.
to a clerical error, but I'll definitely, if you feel better
Yeah, I feel
with the
better.
withdrawal, all right, so someone will take responsibility for that this evening. Thank you. Okay, thank you, Councilwoman. As we move into our items G, H, we have Forgotten Child Fund renewal of leases. I think we did discuss that. I will ask someone from staff to come up and talk about items I and J. I don't think we can talk about those enough, to be quite frank. Jermaine, hello.
Hey, how are you doing, Mr. Chair?
I am well, sir. Will you please go over item I and J? And I'm okay if you take as much time and detail as you need to explain these items.
Okay.
I can pass it down.
So item I is a resolution which basically allows the city of Chattanooga to be exempted from the normal procedures that are called for in the TIF policy that was adopted by City Council back in 2015. The document that I just handed out to you is the first page of the TIF policy that was adopted by City Council back in 2015. If you reference the second paragraph of that TIF policy, it essentially spells out that when the city of Chattanooga and the Chattanooga Housing Authority are seeking to pursue a TIF on their own, they do not have to conform to the TIF policy as it was outlined in 2015. The reason for that is very simple. When the TIF policy was adopted in 2015, and I'm going to sort of take you back in time a little bit, it was really sort of adopted as a way to outline the process for when private developers submitted TIF applications to the city. And it was designed and adopted as a way to provide sort of more, to provide a more open process, because at the time when private developers submitted applications, and to my knowledge, there had only been one TIF that had been approved by the city of Chattanooga at that point. That TIF was the Black Creek TIF, which was approved some time ago. And so the purpose of this, the purpose of the TIF policy as it was adopted was to provide sort of more oversight and to make the process more open, because most people didn't know anything about the process at the time. So when the policy was adopted, it also clearly referenced that when the city of Chattanooga or the Chattanooga Housing Authority wanted to initiate a TIF on their own behalf, that they would be able to do so in a way that would not be tied to or restricted by the rules adopted in this policy. So let me be clear. This policy was adopted, as the language states, for private developers only. It was never meant to be sort of the overarching document that would govern when the city of Chattanooga or the Chattanooga Housing Authority submitted a request to start a TIF. And so weaved sort of through the TIF policy as it exists are both administrative requirements and sort of policy things that would be extremely cumbersome to the city as the city seeks to do an application or as the city seeks a TIF in a redevelopment area. So for example, on the administrative side, there is the requirement of the application and the payment of the application fee and the admin service charge, which is an annual charge that is assessed. On the policy side, then you also have the prohibition against using TIFs for any type of housing whatsoever. There is no specification or no exception made for affordable housing, which is allowable under the state law for IDB TIFs. And the reason that the Chattanooga Housing Authority was included in the opening language of the introduction is because in many states, housing authorities have had the ability under state law to do TIFs for much longer than industrial development boards have. And so that's why the housing authority was included in that. So as the city seeks to accomplish its goals for this large redevelopment area, we seek to have as much flexibility as we can. However, we are still governed by state law because state law is the overarching body that governs tax increment financing in the state of Tennessee for both housing authorities and industrial development boards. So I hope that that helps. And so if we go back in time again and we go back to 2019, in 2019 under the Burke administration, we attempted to initiate a city-led TIF on the East Chattanooga Rising project in the Avondale community. And we quickly realized that as we submitted the application, that the city would need more flexibility than was allowed under the TIF policy for private developers. And so we sought a similar resolution in 2019 that was approved by City Council in December of 2019 that allowed for the exemption of the city from the TIF policies. So I hope that helps, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
I do have a couple lights, so
Sure.
we'll start. Councilman Henderson, I had you active from earlier. Is that you still need to go?
Well, yeah, I have a question.
Go ahead, sir.
So Jermaine, I did call you earlier.
Yes.
Here's my concern, I don't understand why we need a resolution to confirm what a policy already says.
Right.
I mean, we're voting on a resolution to follow the policy.
Yes.
I don't understand why we just don't follow the policy.
From our perspective, because this is what we did back in 2019 with the East Chattanooga Rising TIF, we thought that it would be wise to follow the same precedent. Because basically what it does is it allows for the city of Chattanooga to essentially say, hey, look, we are going above and beyond to let people know that, yes, here's the policy, here's what the policy says, and here's what we're trying to accomplish. And it allows us to make sure that there cannot be any parties or entities that seek to unwind the TIF after it's approved because it did not go through the normal process that a private developer would go through, which is allowable under the resolution that was adopted by City Council in 2015. So we are essentially following the same precedent that we followed in 2019 when we did East Chattanooga Rising.
It's just still a little, I don't understand why we have it in our policy that we don't have to follow the same procedures, but we're
Right.
going to pass a resolution that says, let's follow the policy.
Well,
I mean, that's.
I didn't mean to interrupt.
So
you. I'm
let
sorry.
me ask it this way. If this council decided to withdraw this resolution, we still don't have to follow the same procedures, correct?
You do not have to you do not have to follow the same procedures.
So we would
However,
still be, the city would still be exempt.
the city would still be exempt. However, I think, and I don't want to speak for the city attorney or for the assistant city attorney, that there would be a preference that the city council take action because it does protect the city moving forward against any attempts to question the validity of the TIF.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
You're welcome. Does anyone else want to chime in on that? Only reason I ask is I did hear the word city attorney mentioned, and I usually, my ears perk up. So, Phil, I see you back there. You don't, come on, Phil. You don't have to. We know that's not true, Phil.
The one concern that lawyers always get into whenever you're dealing with issues of resolutions that were passed in 2015 and 2019 is that y'all might change your mind at some point in time. The concern here is we need to have something at the time that this TIF is considered that would be valid. And that is our reason for requesting it to be done, because it was done in resolution in 2015. It was done in resolution in 2019. We're asking it be done again.
So, Phil, let me ask it this way. Is this resolution just a layer of confirmation that we agree,
Yes.
if it were to pass, that we are following state law?
And you're following your
And
city
following our
policy.
own rules?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so it's a layer of agreement.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Councilwoman Hill?
Thank you, Chair. I asked about this last week, and I continue to be concerned about the vagueness of the language. You know, Councilman Henderson's over here saying, well, we're gonna follow the policy. Something that stands out to me is that the actual language in the policy says the city shall follow procedures as the city deems appropriate. And Jermaine, you mentioned that in 2015, the process was put in place because it was designed to be more open and to provide structure and transparency for people so that the public at large, as well as leaders within our city, would be able to look back and see the documentation and know this is what we did, this is how we did it, and here's why we did it that way. And the more I think about that, so originally I asked for the quote certain things that we would be choosing not to follow within this procedure. I asked that those be bulleted within the resolution. Here are the handful of things that we feel as a city tie our hands too much within this policy to be able to achieve our goals. And in conversation with you and then your presentation now, I'm not satisfied that we're beyond the ability to be able to bullet this. If in fact the deal becomes so complicated that we feel like we can't follow the rules, that to me says this is the time when we need to be all the more transparent with the public and follow our own rules. The ones that we have said are a gold standard for a private developer. Now, the things that we talked about last week were, you brought up the application, and today you also noted, the fees and service charges. You also brought up that last week you brought up the fact that the review committee, that we're going to have multiple bodies reviewing the application. And then today, that within the policy, it's prohibited to be used for any kind of housing, affordable housing or CHA housing. So as I hear you say those things, I'm not convinced that you can't do your job without living within the majority of the parameters of this policy. And so, like, for example, the application fee service charges, I'm totally fine to say we're not going to pay the fees and service charges. But as for the application, the benefit of the application within the TIF process is that it provides a formal document that is a point in time. This is what we are saying we want to do. And the public can see that. And yeah, we're putting it out there on websites and things, but the documents have changed over time. And we don't have that point in time. Here's the application. Like I don't have a document in my email that has the TIF boundary on it. That makes me real uncomfortable.
We've sent it to you.
Okay, I'll pull it back up. The policy related to prohibiting housing. We could bullet point that in and say, this potentially may be used for housing. The vagueness of this statement to just say, we're not going to follow certain things, to me, makes it less clear to the public, not more clear. And if the 2019 resolution was intended to make something more clear for the public, to provide a paper trail, as it were, I'd like us to do one better than what they did in 2019 and be more specific.
So from the administration's perspective, the way that we look at this is the resolution that we've put forward is a resolution that, again, will give the city maximum flexibility to go out and to pursue a TIF for this area. If you read through the application, which was intended for private developers, that application is going to break down every linear square foot of sewer, every linear square foot of curb and gutter that's required, every single street light that's required as part of the application. Those are things that we as a city don't know yet. Because as we look to do a redevelopment of this site, part of the challenge is knowing kind of what some of the individual infrastructure pieces that will be needed. But that's not the purpose of a TIF when the city does a TIF. When the city seeks to do a TIF, or when the Chattanooga Housing Authority seeks to list out and bullet every single item that you think is going to be covered in terms of street lights and curb and gutter, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, the purpose is to define an area of blight that needs to be redeveloped, and then to give yourself as a jurisdiction the flexibility that you need to go out and to make it happen by creating a funding stream through tax increment financing. That's the whole purpose. And if you look at the way that TIFs are done across the country, including in jurisdictions outside of Chattanooga, that is typically how TIFs are done, in that jurisdictions identify areas that are ripe for redevelopment, they identify areas that are blighted, and they basically say, we're going to draw a boundary around this area, we're going to redevelop it. We don't necessarily have all of the details that will go along or that are typically required for private developers. And that's okay, because when a city is seeking to do a TIF, it is seeking to do the TIF in the public's best interest. When a private developer is seeking a TIF, there is a private motivation behind wanting to do the TIF, in that the private developer has money in a deal, and the TIF is a way to help pay for infrastructure costs to offset some of the costs that a private developer has to take on that then impact the private developer's rate of return. That is not the case here with the city of Chattanooga, where we are building a multi-use stadium that will be tax exempt and that will be open to the public and that the people of the city and county will own. There is no private motivation here. And so that is why that is captured in the introduction of the TIF. Now, again, there are many things in the TIF policy that we are seeking exemption from, but the TIF policy that we adopted in 2015, it's not the Bible of TIF policy throughout the country. For example, it doesn't mention the requirement or the fact that the city and county will protect school taxes. That's not mentioned anywhere in the TIF policy that was adopted by this council in 2015. That's something that we, the city and county, have chosen to do because it's good public policy, and it's something that we have chosen to do on our own. The TIF policy before you, it does not capture or require prolonged or sustained community engagement. That is also something that we, the city, have committed to, because that is something that we care about. So when you look at the TIF policy, it's not that the TIF policy is necessarily the gold standard. It is a gold standard for private developers, yes, but the city has to have the flexibility to be able to do and to sort of cast an aspirational vision for what redevelopment should look like, and to have the flexibility to go out and to make that vision happen.
You make a strong case. The boundary, as you began to talk, I quickly pulled up. So I found something in my email from Brent from the original day of the presentation. It was on the 30th. Has the boundary changed at all from this?
Yes,
It has changed.
it has changed.
I have no record of that new change. Is that something that
We also presented that last week in City Council.
I
So
have no record of that I have no document. I asked for that document. I sent an email and said, may I please have the document that has that on it? So if you showed it here, that's great. I need it so I can study it.
Okay. I'm happy to send it. I thought that we had sent you the link to the wider site. But yes, we also presented that before City Council and the County Commission and the county's industrial development.
So you didn't send us a document. You sent us a link to a website.
The link, yes, we had GIS actually create an overlay online that would be easily accessible for people to just be able to click on the link and you could see the overall TIF boundary. We felt like that was easier because it's a link. You can access it from anywhere.
I'll take a look at that. I'll be interested to see if my colleagues have concerns about the transparency of this resolution as we continue to talk.
I would also just add that the map of the boundary that we sent, that's the same boundary that includes the Alton Park connector. So I think all of you are aware that the Alton Park connector parcel was included in the TIF district. And so that's still the current map that we have.
Councilman Hill, you good? Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Madam Vice Chair.
Yes. Hey, Jermaine.
Yes, ma'am.
I did have a question from one of my constituents, and
Yes,
I
ma'am.
always want to lead in with, I support this project, but I'm glad that my fellow council members are asking these questions for
Sure.
transparency, because that is
Yes,
what we do for our people. We got to be transparent.
100%.
Yeah. So the question I had that I received, it says the city of Chattanooga initiated this TIF. Are there agreements addressing financing and community benefits already drafted or anticipated, like with Hardball Capital, the Master Developer Core, or Perimeter Properties? That's the first part of that question. The second, would the agreements be with the city and county or with the new sports authority? And will these have strong clawback? Will this have strong clawback language from Brent?
Yes. Yes. So we are currently working on all of that. So when you look at your future considerations, the city, you all requested that we start to draft MOUs with some of the development partners. Those MOUs are now on your future considerations. Okay. Candidly, we are still in negotiations, so we have not finalized those documents at this time. Those MOUs are another example of something that's not required or spelled out in the TIF policy that we are seeking to do to go above and beyond. To the second part of the question about community benefits agreements, that is also something that we are currently working on, and something, and I'm going to say this to put this on the record, something that Mayor Kelly has made it very clear he wants to see as part of this overall project is a community benefits agreement. So you can quote me on it, you can write it up, you can say Jermaine said it, okay? And so the community benefits agreements, though, are an important part of this, and it's something that we're still working on, and certainly something that we want to make sure that the South Chattanooga Neighborhood Association is involved in, because typically that is done with a community group. It is still currently undecided whether or not the primary partner in the community benefits agreement will be the city, the county, or the sports authority. But Hardball Capital, the owner of the Lookouts, will certainly be a part of the community benefits agreements, and then one of the public jurisdictions, at least one of the public jurisdictions as well. But again, a community benefits agreement is also not spelled out in the 2015 policy that was adopted by City Council. So we are going above and beyond as a city to do everything that we need to do. But I just want to be clear for constituents who look at the resolution and they think, oh, there's something that we're trying to hide. There's nothing that we're trying to hide. We're going above and beyond. Everybody knows that we're doing a TIF. And so when you think about previous projects where the TIFs may have worked their way through the bureaucracy and the public didn't even have any input on them or didn't know about them. That is not what this is. Everybody for 3 counties away know that we're doing a TIF to build a public use stadium on this site. And so there's no secret here. All of this is planned out in the public, and we will try to make documents as quickly as possible as they come through. And there's a lot of documents.
Right. And my next question was from another constituent. I don't know if there was some misinformation or whatever put out, but could you clarify if the Lookouts are putting any money into this project?
They are putting money into the project in terms of the lease itself. Okay. And so that's a great question. There have been some misconceptions about what the ownership of the Lookouts did in other cities like Fort Wayne and Columbia. In those other cities, what they did was they put in money up front, which was then deducted from their rent over time. And so what we're saying is we'd rather have your money over time because it provides us stability for the bond issue and it provides us more predictable revenues for the bond issue. So that's why their rent is higher here in Chattanooga than it is in Fort Wayne versus Columbia.
All right. Thank you so much, Jermaine. I appreciate it.
Yes, ma'am.
Good, Madam Vice Chair. Dr. Burrs.
Thank you. So I'm really behind the stadium. I think this is something that should happen and it'll be great for that area. I think there's some considerations that I want to bring forward again.
Yes, ma'am.
And that is something that one of my colleagues said last week, and that is we don't have a number of the pieces in place. You just mentioned we're working on them.
Yes.
That would protect the areas that we're concerned about. And so even though everybody has their word that they're going to do this, they're not in place. And I have a problem with that. And it goes in all kinds of directions. And we could talk about gentrification. We could talk about that. We've talked about land trusts. We've talked about all kinds of things. But the bottom line is right now, because this is a neat opportunity,
Right.
we're overlooking and we may end up with some unintended consequences simply because of the market and all of that. That's number one. Number two, and this goes along with what Councilperson Henderson said, I get it. I don't know why, except the lawyers want it, why we're voting to approve something that's already a policy, unless we're thinking we might need overprotection because maybe there are some people out there. I think we have to stand by our policies. So I'm very uncomfortable about doing that. Number three, and this gets with what Councilwoman Hill said. I don't know why we can't, just let me finish, why it might not be prudent to go ahead and follow the policy, exempting fees, exempting whatever. I wrote down what you said, and you said we require developers, private developers, to put every street light, all of that stuff. All we know is we're going to develop it. We haven't seen any plan about what you have in mind. And I'm still hit with, and it goes with transparency. It's not that anybody's trying to do anything inappropriate. I'm still going with some illusory stuff from last week, and that was the Corps guy who said, well, really, we're not going to put $179 million in. I believe it's on record, unless the stadium's built. It all kind of goes together. And I believe the only reason we're pushing this and rushing this, or time is of the essence, has to do with the Lookouts. And I still don't get that because they do have a place. Are they saying if you don't build it, we're leaving and we're leaving now? That was really unclear to
Sure.
me, and I could use some help.
Sure. So the lookouts, so it's not the lookouts, it's Major League Baseball.
All right, whoever it is, it's the
Yes.
baseball piece.
That's right. It's
right.
professional baseball. It's Major League Baseball, which has made it clear to minor league teams around the country that if you don't upgrade your facilities, we will move the team. We will order that the team be moved out of your current jurisdiction to a new jurisdiction. And so that is who is putting the pressure on the lookouts. It's Major League Baseball. Please, it's good to note though that even as we've talked about this, and as we work through this process, it will still take 18 to 24 months for a stadium to be built. So the lookouts would still not be able to play in a new stadium until 2025 at the very earliest.
Okay, I got it. So
Yes.
what's the urgency?
So the urgency is that the Major League Baseball understands that it takes a long time to build a stadium.
Mm-hmm.
And so they want to see commitments from local governments that local governments will in fact be serious about building and providing new facilities.
And I think we should do that.
Yes, ma'am.
Here's my concern. Does it matter whether we do it now or if we do it a month from now? And here's where I'm going with this.
Yeah.
I think we should do it.
Sure.
All right. And I'm behind it.
Yes.
My colleagues' questions are really good. And they are, have we laid the foundation? Have we established the trust? Have we, can we say to people, yes, we're going to do the TIF and this is what it's going to fund? Not, in general, this is what it's going to fund. Is it just going to fund around the stadium or is it going to fund a lot more than that?
Right.
I think we have to not be a we they, but figure out how all of this can work together. And so I think that I would be uncomfortable waiving everything if we can do it better and it's a win-win for both sides. And I'm sensing that the urgency, or I thought the urgency was Major League Baseball,
Mhm.
but you're right, nothing's going to happen for several years anyway. So is there some urgency that obviates us from doing what areas of transparency would be necessary to answer all these questions? That's all I'm saying. Fees, you're right in everything
Sure.
you're saying. But when it comes to, and I guess I picked up on your comment about, we'd have to show every street light and we don't even know what it's going to be. And I don't think that's an unfair concern. I think it would alleviate all this stuff because there's a lot of misinformation out there.
Sure.
So if we could consider looking at the TIF, getting rid of the stuff that like fees and that, I think things might be better. And I guess we should have started doing that instead of getting positional, because I think there's a win-win there. Is there something wrong with that? What am I missing here? I've read all this.
Well, if I'm not mistaken, and I do mean this with all respect, but I believe that there were several members of this city council that voted on this same resolution in 2019 for the
I would have
Chattanooga
been
West.
here and done it.
Yes.
A lot of us would have been here
Yes,
and
ma'am.
done it.
And so, again, as our assistant city attorney pointed out, this is just an area to provide us extra protection. Everything that we have committed to is spelled out, and we have spelled that out in many presentations as well as an economic impact plan at this point. And so, as we look at the breakdown of the financing, yes, we know that we're going to need to pay for a stadium. We also know that there's going to be debt service there. And we also know that there are going to be some infrastructure improvements. And we've spelled all of that out and said that. However, we as a city, when looking at this as a larger redevelopment area, very similar to how we looked at Enterprise South, there is no way for us to know at this stage of the game every single individual itemized cost that's going to be required. And that's no different from an industrial park or that the city sets out to do or anything else.
Okay, and I get that. I guess, so I would have been, I was on the council in 2019,
Yes, ma'am.
so I would have voted for this.
Yes, ma'am.
What I didn't anticipate was what we're doing now. And so I'm thinking, okay, shall I go ahead and vote for what we did then? Or because this is a much bigger, wonderful, unanticipated project, should I say, you know what? We've gotten so much from the public, and there's a lot of misinformation. Why shouldn't we follow the process, getting rid of the details? So I'm not hearing you.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm trying to figure why the urgency, why not coming forth and saying, and I know we've been looking at the South Side for a long time.
Yes.
These are real issues that my colleagues have brought up. And so all right, let me ask you this.
Yes,
If we were to follow the TIF process without fees, without all of that, would that have answered? We've had the public meetings. We've done that, right? You've already told us.
Yes, ma'am.
We've done that.
Yes, ma'am.
So if we were to follow the TIF process, a lot of it we've already done, just by the way you've handled things. A lot of these questions would have been answered.
They would not have.
All right, that's what I'm not getting. It looks like they would.
They would not.
All right, the TIF process requires community meetings. Boy, there have been piles of community meetings.
Right. That's
right.
not spelled out in the policy, but that's something that we've
Yeah.
done on
So
our own.
what is it that you would have to do? I mean, y'all have done a really thorough job.
Yes.
What is it that you would have to do left? What am I missing?
So essentially, as you follow the TIF process, the way that it's spelled out in the policy, it requires you to sort of start with the Industrial Development Board, and then to sort of go through sort of a longer, slower time period of passing resolutions between the Industrial Development Board and the City Council, back to the Industrial Development Board, back to the City Council, back to the Industrial Development Board, back to the City Council.
All right.
And so the process is different because it's designed to be that way for a private developer. This is really unique in that this process didn't start with us. It actually started with the county. And so because we are partnering with the county to seek a joint TIF, so to speak, we are following the state procedures because we also realize that the county's not going to follow our policy anyway because our policy only applies to private developers within the city. It has no bearing on the county whatsoever. And so as we look to do sort of a joint, more transformational TIF in partnership with the county, we had to give ourselves flexibility in order to do that because this is just a much larger scale project than what would normally be contemplated by a smaller, singular economic development project being initiated by a private developer. This is just bigger in scale, which is why it was exempted in the policy to begin with when the policy was first created.
So we're getting ready to go to the IDB. We
Yes.
have control over time. And I'm not hearing you. I'm saying it might alleviate a lot of, he said, she said, this is what they said, a lot of these questions that some of my colleagues have. You're saying the process would take too long?
It's a different process because of the order, because of the sequence of events that happens throughout that process. And because this is starting with the county, which is unusual. It doesn't usually start with the county. Because it's starting with the county, and because we as a city are seeking to partner with the county to make this TIF project happen, we are seeking and want to reaffirm the city's ability to be exempt from the normal procedures. Normal TIFs don't start with the county. They typically are private development TIFs that start with the city, IDB, but they are much smaller in nature. We're not going out and building 500,000 square feet of commercial industrial space. We're going out and trying to redevelop an
A
entire
whole
area,
area, which is wonderful.
which is why we need maximum flexibility in order to be able to do that. And all of the things that you all have asked us to do in terms of pursuing the MOUs with the developers, you asked us to start that process last week. We are in the process of doing that and are furiously negotiating with all parties involved as we speak.
So when will we have those?
You'll have those you will not have to take a vote on a TIF until you see those. So they will all be lined up, stacked up together. And again, you can look at Jermaine and you can blame me if you don't have them.
So you're saying that if we waive the formal processes that are time consuming, that even if you don't have those MOUs by the 9th or whenever, then you're not going to ask us to vote on the TIF.
All parties involved understand the urgency of the MOUs that you all requested. We have made that abundantly clear to all parties involved. And so
Is that a yes?
yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Burrs. You want to take a breath there, Jermaine?
I'm good.
Brent, I see you circling back there. Do you want to add anything? I could feel you circling back there.
Sure. No, and thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to maybe back up just a bit. So I have the fiduciary responsibility to manage TIFs for the city of Chattanooga. Once they are approved by this council, it's my responsibility. The TIF policy that's currently in place, it was approved by resolution in 2015, clearly exempts the city from following anything in that document for a city initiated TIF. I fully believe that we have the executive authority to create a TIF with your approval after it goes to the IDB without following anything in that document. I think the document only applies to private developers. I don't think it was ever intended to apply to a city initiated TIF for all the reasons Jermaine spoke about. However, and with what Mr. Noblet said, it's great for the city council to affirm what's already in the policy, that this is a city initiated TIF. And that's really what this resolution does. It affirms that this is a city initiated TIF, and therefore it's not following what private developers follow. But if you all choose not to vote on that particular resolution, we can still go along with the TIF and under the policy that was created in 2015. I fully believe that. So, I think that is up to the council about whether or not you want to vote on that particular resolution. The other resolution is simply intention to issue a TIF and to send this to the IDB. So I just want to be very clear that there is no vote being taken on the TIF tonight. It's merely about, affirmation about the fact that we are creating a city initiated TIF and a vote to, on the intent to create a TIF district and be on the IDB agenda next week. The vote would be August 9th for the actual TIF for you all to vote on, which will include many, many, many documents that will come from the county, because the county is scheduled to vote on this tomorrow, or not tomorrow. Next Wednesday. Tomorrow is the agenda session for the county, where the documents will become available, because this, as Jermaine said, this is a county, a joint TIF between the city and the county, and it's starting with the county. So I just want to make back up a little bit and make all that clear. But also I wanted to say, as the city finance officer, I am fully comfortable with there not being any sort of application for this, because half the application would be blank. There's just, it's very similar to the type of work we did at Enterprise South, because we didn't know what we were going to have to do when we first went in there. All we know for certain is that we are including a publicly owned stadium, which we've provided ample information on. And we know that we have a master developer that will determine what the development around the stadium will look like. And the master developer knows that they are responsible for infrastructure until the stadium is paid for. Any increment generated beyond that could go toward infrastructure, but this TIF is designed in the early stages to pay for a stadium, which is a publicly owned asset that will be a catalyst to drive development around that stadium. So it is it's unique in many ways, and it is a city initiated TIF so that we can clean up a brownfield in a blighted area and create a catalyst for economic development. And, that's why, I mean, the applicant, I mean, we could attach, our slideshow to the application, but that slideshow is already part of the public record. We've presented it in several public meetings. It should be referenced in all public minutes. And I mean, we're happy to, email any information that we've already presented to you all at any time, of course.
Okay. I do have two more lights, Brent. So if you and Jermaine will hold on, I want to reiterate, since you brought up the next item, you're referring to item J on our agenda, which is simply sending it over to the IDB.
It is, but it also is an acknowledgement that a multi-use stadium or any of the corresponding infrastructure is not currently part of our capital improvement plan.
Correct.
And so that's why it meets the but for, meaning that but for this TIF,
It would not happen.
it would not happen.
I understand. I just want to make sure, since we touched on item J. Councilwoman Hill, I see your light.
This has been an administration that has said it's dedicated to transparency, and I think you've done quite a bit to walk that walk. We just went through this whole ARP process that is remarkably transparent in terms of how you set up your grading structure, what you were looking for. To walk into something that is continually called a transformative and or generational project, and to make an argument that the county doesn't have to follow this. I don't ever look to the county as a bastion of transparency or of, following logical processes that are in the best interest of the taxpayer. My colleague, Councilwoman Burrs, used the word better. I used the word better last week. I want us to be better. And when we talk about a win-win, I want Chattanoogans to win with a capital W, and our for-profit partners can win with a little w. Because, everybody can win in this. But to me, when we say that the longer that the TIF process with regard to the IDB, you said it's longer and slower. There are resolutions that go between the city council to the IDB. In my notes that I'm taking, it seems to me that that is the open process where there is a cadence that the public can expect and understand, versus a black box over here that you don't really know what's happening inside of. And to say that we as a city are the ones guiding this, and then to say in the next sentence that we have a master developer, that's not our parks department that's deciding that. That's not our public works director. That is a for-profit developer that at the end of the day does not live in Chattanooga, was not elected to serve the people of Chattanooga and to be here generationally, to be a part of Chattanooga. I am just deeply concerned about us stepping away from transparency in any way that is not stepping away from transparency in a way that is not clear. That kind of is a double negative, I suppose. I just am still not convinced, Jermaine, that we cannot identify within this resolution what are the handful of things that we are not going to follow, so that the city at large can know, here's all the rest of it that you can expect that we will do to prove to you that the due diligence continues behind the scenes. Because years ago, there was a councilwoman who sat in Chip's seat who said, without that 2015 policy, you're ripe for corruption. And if we shine light in all the dark places, it alleviates the question of corruption. Not that anybody thinks anything wrong is happening, but if you've got light there, you prove that there isn't. It sounds like I have one colleague who might be open to pushing for that language to be further clarified. Um, I think we're just on different sides of this bullet list
Well,
idea.
That's okay. I mean, I think that again, our goal and my goal as an economic developer is to just to give the city the maximum flexibility that it needs.
Mhm.
And that is my only goal here. And I think that's also the goal of the administration, is that as we look at a big complex project, how do we just give ourselves the maximum flexibility that we need to be able to pivot, to be able to change direction if we need to be able to adjust as we learn and as circumstances play out on the ground. And that is our central and motivating goal, which is why we did the same thing in 2019 with East Chattanooga, because we knew that, you know, with that TIF, we had a large manufacturer that was coming into the Avondale community. We needed to build some infrastructure to support that development. But then we also knew that there was a larger area around Nippon Paint that would be ripe for redevelopment. But we didn't know what that redevelopment would look like, because we intended to continue to do community engagement and gather public input to inform what that development would look like. And so that's why we actually exempted ourselves to be able to provide more transparency in 2019 when we did the East Chattanooga Rising TIF. This is really not different in our opinion, because as you look at it, this is not a TIF deal that is happening in the dead of night. As I said before, everyone knows that we're doing a TIF, and everyone knows what this project is. And so we're not hiding anything. Everything that we are asking for and advocating for is in the public's eye, for the public to be able to see and hear. Over 200 people participated in the South Broad District Planning, which was a plan that was adopted by City Council that called for the creation of a TIF district, and that called for the use of a multi-use stadium as a potential catalytic project to catalyze the redevelopment of that area. That's not a secret. That is public information that was adopted by the regional planning agency and then by City Council in 2018. And since then, there have been a number of community members and meetings that have happened as a result of that process. So we feel like we've been very open at this point. Brent and I and Charles have done numerous presentations. This process will involve 2 public hearings, which a typical TIF transaction only requires a single public hearing. We have done everything. We typically don't set up websites for TIF projects. There is a website that is established. And to your question about the master developer doesn't work for the city. The master developer works for the property owners, because all of the property is privately owned. And so but it was always the goal of Mayor Kelly and the administration to say that, hey, unless there is a larger entity who we feel confident can master develop the site to get us the scale of economic development and the density that we want, we are not interested in this project. And so that's what they did in terms of going out and hiring Jim Irwin. And to Councilwoman Burrs' original question about the timing, that timing is also important to us too, because this is a unique opportunity in that we have property owners who are willing to collaborate. We have an administration that wants to move forward. We have many community members that are in support, and we have a master developer who has come along and said the development of this project aligns with the timing that I have relative to my other projects. And so I can make this happen if there is the ability for us to get the timing just right. And so that is also a big part of this, because if he is not involved, we will not be involved.
Brent, I have one other question for you, please, sir. We talked about the financing of the stadium and long term. You know, what if the Lookouts leave? Now we're working on an MIOU to mitigate as much risk as possible. Something we have not talked about is cost overruns. So what if this thing costs $15 million more than we expect? How do we protect the taxpayers from that?
Good question.
Can we ask the lookouts to, or require the lookouts to pay any overruns?
I mean, we could ask them, but I'm certain they will not agree to that. But what we can do to protect ourselves from cost overruns is, first of all, we don't know if there's going to be overruns, right? We build all kinds of things throughout the city. Sometimes there's overruns, sometimes there's not. All construction plans will have a contingency built in. So, the $72 million is the amount of money we will have. That's what bonds will be issued for $72 million. We know that. So that's how much will be available. There will be some level of contingency built in, and then we will design the construction of the stadium, or the sports authority technically will design the construction of the stadium such that we have that amount of money with the contingency built in, just like we normally do. And if costs continue to rise, for example, which it looks like they're starting to stabilize and may even start coming down, both materials and labor, but let's say they continue to rise, things you can do in the stadium is make sure you have all the infrastructure in the stadium, mechanical, plumbing, electrical, those sorts of things, all the things that meet the compliance standards of Major League Baseball, but maybe not add bells and whistles, right? That we could within a $72 million budget with lower costs. So that's been done before by this particular ownership group, Hardball Capital. I don't know if you may remember from the presentation, they began the development of the stadium in Fort Wayne, Indiana during the Great Recession. And they did have to do some of those things in the very beginning where they left off a couple of things here and there that they went back and added later once there was enough development to generate enough increment to do that. So that's what we would do. I mean, we would build it in compliance with MLB, make sure all the appropriate infrastructure is there. But if we have to leave off a beer garden the first 2 years, then that's what we would leave off, right? And then once development is sufficient to cover additional items, we could do that. So
That sounds practical.
and the way the way this will work, and it'll be in the economic impact plan that you all vote on, is the increment has to pay for the stadium first. We're going to fund a capital reserve account, which you'll see in the language, starting in year 5 from the increment. And that'll fund from year 5 all the way out to year 30, so that there is money there for just things that happen later on, because it is a publicly owned stadium. The third item is pay back the city and county for any money we have to put in the event that we have to cover debt service. So that's something that we will likely get back from increment. Fourth item is going to be Alton Park connector. And then any increment that's generated beyond that could go back into infrastructure anywhere in the TIF area, which includes the stadium. So, my point is, if
The
we have to
increment
go
comes
back
back
and
to
add
us,
on
not
to the stadium,
not to core.
right?
Okay.
Yeah. Now, I mean, down the road, could any developer in the TIF area get reimbursed for public infrastructure? Yes, but only after everything else is sufficiently covered.
Okay. Yeah, that's very different than the other TIF we just approved. Okay.
Yeah, and it's and by the way, that doesn't just go to anyone; it goes to the IDB to be allocated, right? So there are additional approvals that have to occur down the road.
The other thing that I would just mention is that you all will have the opportunity to see every single financing document that is part of this. So all of that will be made available to you.
I genuinely appreciate both of you and the work that you've done and how clearly you're able to answer questions, even when I don't like the answers to them. Thanks, guys.
Councilman Henderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I think maybe one thing that the council may be doing is losing a little bit of sight of what the tool of a TIF is actually designed to do. And we may probably have more information about this TIF than what a TIF is actually designed to do. I mean, a TIF is designed to identify a blighted area that we would like to invest in. And so we define an area and we capture the revenue off of that to provide infrastructure. In this case, we're providing infrastructure in the form of a catalyst and we're going to identify a blighted area. So really all we're doing tonight is identifying a blighted area that we would like to capture the revenue to make improvements. And I think that we have, like I said, probably more information about this particular TIF than we may ordinarily have for what that tool is actually designed for. I've always believed that winners take imperfect action while losers are still perfecting the plan. I think there will always be questions that we may have about this project, but I think the main questions have been answered. And my question earlier was not questioning the TIF or anything about it. I don't understand why several of us on this council voted on these policies,
Yes, sir.
and it says that we're exempt from following the procedures of a normal TIF.
Yes, sir.
I'm completely comfortable with that. I just don't understand why we've got to confirm that, other than the fact that the lawyers said that we needed to. They've muddied the water.
Yes.
So to answer Councilwoman Hill's question, yes, I feel comfortable with moving forward with this. I can understand, by drawing out and following those procedures, it creates probably another 2 or 3 months to the process, which pushes us up against the time that Major League Baseball needs to know, are you going to have a stadium for the Lookouts or not? So
Yes.
I think a project like this builds momentum, and the time to take the foot off the throttle on a jet airplane is not when the front wheels are lifting off the ground. So yes, I feel comfortable with moving forward with this. I just don't understand why we need to confirm that we're going to follow our procedures that we voted on. And if we're not comfortable with those procedures in the TIF, then maybe we need to look at changing those policies. Otherwise, let's follow the policy.
Thank you, Councilman. I'm seeing no other lights on items I think we covered J pretty well. I'll just add in that I appreciate this council's diligence in asking questions. In 2017, when I was elected, I can guarantee you this level of questioning did not exist when we were talking about pilots and TIFs. We have learned a lot. We have changed and increased, I think, when you're talking in regards to pilots and TIFs, we've gotten better at this. Are we imperfect human beings? Sure. But we have gotten really good at asking questions, and you're seeing a lot of deep, deep questions coming from council. And I think that's exactly what we should be doing. And I appreciate the answers and the questions coming from this body. Moving on to fire, items K and L. I'm going to, this morning we realized we had a slight issue with these two items that we'd like to defer for 1 week. And I've talked to Councilman Henderson about that. Under legal, if you'll take a look at that item. Joe, do you want to just give us a real brief? This was a very interesting item that we covered this morning about expanding possibility to travel from this city.
Yes. So as a part of our economic development work, frequently we are evaluated on a range of different metrics and qualities, and one of which is how many places we can get to via our airport, which is why we pursued a FAA grant to open up a route west, particularly to Denver, Colorado, which has been a major priority for Mayor Kelly. And this interlocal agreement is a partnership with Hamilton County, where we would provide $150,000 each in order for to receive a $750,000 grant to open up that route, hopefully to Denver, Colorado. This is a huge opportunity for our city, our airport, and our economic development prospects as a community. Jermaine, I don't know if you had anything else to add as our lead economic development professional, but just go ahead and add that to you.
The only thing that I would add is it was really important for us to be able to support the airport authority on West Coast routes, because we really wanted to focus on how we could continue to grow our innovation and startup community, especially with our tech scene. And so having the ability to have companies that are based in California or Denver that could have easier access to the Chattanooga market to potentially open second offices or third offices or whatever the case. That was what was particularly attractive to us about opening access to the West. So this is really more about sort of being able to improve our economic prospects and leveraging our high-speed internet with some of the companies that are out west, and really trying to open up Chattanooga to get better access to those companies.
Very good. Any questions or comments on this item? All right. Thank you, Jermaine.
Yes, sir.
Under Mayor's office, we have item N through double R. So this morning at 10:30, council met to further discuss the ARP funding in great depth. There was tremendous amount of dialogue, incredible conversations and questions. And I do not anticipate at this point any further questions on items N through RR. Purchasing, we have 4 items for this evening. If you'll take a quick look at your purchases, you did receive these earlier in the week for your review. We have no RFPs. We have no emergency purchases to report. And then if you will pop over to your August 2nd agenda. And let me know if you have any questions on August 2nd. It's a rather short agenda. Okay. We will then, pretty short. We will now move into future considerations. If you would take a look at your future considerations. I would note that you will see a couple of items related to the discussion that we just had regarding MOUs with 2 specific entities that are in the works. So I wanted to make a special note of that. If you see anything else, please hit your light. Seeing no lights on future considerations, we will move into department reports, which we have none. We do have 2 committees this afternoon. We have Parks and Public Safety. So if there's no other comments, we will go ahead and move into Parks and Public Works. Chairman Hester, you want to take the center? It's like moving in and moving out.
Thank you, Chair. Can we approve the minutes? Welcome to Parks and Public Works Committee. We don't have much on the agenda today. Madam Clerk, can you read SS, please? 7SS.
They extend the contract for 30 months to amend certain unit pipeline items due to supply chain.
Thank you. Resolution for next Tuesday, 7B, please.
Resolution authorizing the administrative department for the work entering the public private partnership agreement with NBSC Black Creek LLC for the collection and long-term study of data related to infiltration, evaporation, and water volumes at Black Creek Flood in exchange for the issuance of credit coupon at market rate. C code section 31356.
Thank you. Thank you. Director, you have anything to add?
Yes, would like to, and I'm sorry, Ben is running an errand. I think my car and my alarm might be going off, and he was very nice to go out and check. I don't know. I don't know, but Ben was very nice to run out and do that. He did want to make a special announcement, though, that this week is celebration of, and I see him coming, the Bike Chattanooga anniversary and 10-year anniversary. And we have events coming up. And this is a terrible thing. Ben, hi. So I'm just introducing you to invite city council members to the Bike Chattanooga celebration. I already told them about the car, so you got a good excuse.
Hi, everybody. Guess how long we've had Bike Chattanooga?
10 years.
There you go. Way to go. So on Thursday at noon, I'd like to cordially invite everyone here. At least 4 of you have bike share stations in your district already. And another one, Councilman Coonrod's going to be a recipient of $1 million worth of additional bike share stations coming in soon. On noon at the outdoor Chattanooga facility, we'll have some light refreshments. The CEO from Shift Transit, our operator, will be there with some new ideas for Bike Chattanooga. And we'd like to have everyone there and see the new stuff and give you some refreshments and hear from Mayor Kelly. Thanks.
Thank you, Ben. Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman. Will you make sure we get an invite on our calendar for that as a reminder?
Yes, sir. We'll
Thank
do.
you. And that's a great program. I remember when it first came online, it was obviously brand new. And I thought, is this really what's this going to do? And I tell you what, I see them everywhere, people riding bikes. It's amazing.
I agree 100%.
All right.
Thank you,
Thank
sir.
you.
Thank you. Chip Henderson, did you have some comments? Your light was on. Okay, thanks.
I do have a question.
There's a question on item B, please.
Thanks. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, this is for Bill. This morning I had asked a little bit about this resolution and to make sure that folks didn't get any kind of misconception that the credits were in some way applied to doing something less in an area. And Bill, you explained it a little bit more elegantly as you always do and at length too. I appreciate it. If you would elaborate a little bit more about how the credits are used and how they're not used.
Yes, sir. Happy to do that. So in this instance, there are all development projects inside the city are required to meet certain stormwater infiltration or reuse standards, sort of commonly known as green infrastructure. And there's a minimum amount of volume, rainwater runoff volume that has to be controlled by those standards. However, in certain circumstances, whether it's soil conditions or just the space that the developer has, the current code actually allows for the developers to overbuild and to create more volume that they can then earn a credit coupon for in order to apply towards either another of their projects, or they can just privately among themselves either sell or barter trade those credit coupons to another developer who may have a hardship. So the code does allow in the instance if there's a hardship and you're unable to meet that, the minimum standard, then everything goes to an alternate method of controlling stormwater, but you do have to redeem the credit coupons in order for that to happen. In this case, Black Creek wants to create some additional storage where they are eligible to do that, and then be able to, and most likely they will use that for other projects that they have in later phases of their development. There are some restrictions on the use of those. For example, you cannot move them from one watershed to another. So you couldn't, for example, earn all your benefit in one particular watershed and then go completely across town in order to trade those in. So that way there's not a localized impact that happens in that way. The other thing about the alternate methodology that I mentioned, the developer still has to control flood volumes. They still have to treat pollution and water quality of the stormwater runoff that comes from their site. So those are all still minimum requirements. It's really is the practice of infiltration and or reuse of the stormwater runoff from a 1-inch rain within 72 hours. So that's really what the credit coupon is about. It has to do with specifically what happens to that runoff within that 72-hour period. And that's where the credit coupons come into play. But in this case, Black Creek not only wants to earn additional credit coupons, but they want to understand better, and the city also wants to understand better how these practices actually benefit. So how much reuse potential is there? How much is lost to evaporation? And so this is actually going to provide additional data, which will help us provide better better design guidelines to developers that are out there. So in this case, Black Creek wants to do some unique things related to their green infrastructure. They want to over design that so that they can then earn the credit coupons for that. And so that's the reason why we're doing this as a partnership with them, is because there are some alternate designs that they want to do to enhance the traditional green infrastructure design that's currently required.
And ultimately, the city will, I'm assuming, will gain some knowledge and
Yes.
For future use to be able to pass on or even implement into our own stormwater policy when that time comes to update.
That's correct. That's
Okay.
that's what we'd expect, is that we'll use the information gained from the data collection to be able to improve the design criteria that we already require.
Very good. I thank you for elaborating on that. Chairman, thank you.
Thank you. This conclude our Parks and Public Works Committee. We're going to, what? Shit, it's quick. Jenny Hill, Councilwoman Hill.
Thank you. Bill, it's nice to see you. So this causes me some concern, and it's a section of city code that I need to study. I'm glad that you said that these credits cannot move across watersheds. As a city council person who represents folks that are getting flooded out because of development right up the hill, the same people that built their house are building above them and flooding them out, and it's a devil may care situation. Help me understand how this is in the best interest of citizens of Chattanooga, this part of our ordinance. How are homeowners protected in this credit system?
I want to be sure I'm clear. You're not asking about the resolution in front of you. You're asking about generally the credit coupon system as a whole.
Yes.
Okay. So the stormwater regulations are multi-layered. And so there is a separate flood control section that is required. So there is a certain requirements that have to be met for flood control, for example. There is also a separate section that has a separate requirement that has to be met specifically for green infrastructure as the primary standard for treating the runoff in terms of removing pollution and other contaminants from urban runoff, which is generated by these developments. And however, that standard that has been dictated to us by the state of Tennessee does come with some restrictions. For example, the soils may not allow the type of infiltration rate. And so there is an alternate method to correcting that urban pollution issue, but it's separate and apart from the flood control aspect.
Right,
So those are two different things. And in this case, the credit coupons only applies towards the pollution side and does not affect the flood control aspect.
All right. Thank you very much for that clarification. Thank you, Chair.
You good?
Yes.
Councilwoman Chip Henderson, your light was on again. Okay, all right. This conclude Parks and Public Works. We're going to have Public Safety Committee.
Makes me a little nervous to be back in this seat again. Call to order our Public Safety Committee. Could I have approval of the minutes? No objections, they'll stand as recorded. So this afternoon, we have a couple of items that we need to go over. One, we have the former chair. Isn't that a good sound to that? Former chair, Miss Kay Baker, from our Police Advisory Review Committee, and she was going to present our quarterly report. As well as in your packet, you have some amendments to the park ordinance that Ms. Baker and I have been discussing about some changes that they would like to make in that. Given that that you haven't seen that until you opened your packet. I had hoped to have it sooner, but we, I think, went through about 5 revisions trying to get it to a point that we could present it to you. So, Ms. Baker, if you want to give us the quarterly report and maybe any highlights of the revisions that the committee has recommended to make to the ordinance.
Sure. The quarterly report, it's in its standard form. We reviewed 52 cases in the period covering April, May, and June of this year with approximately 67 officers. That's an uptick from prior quarters that we've had. We had a lot more cases this quarter. Breakdown, there were 27 citizen-generated complaints and 25 internally generated complaints. And as you'll see, the majority of the internally generated complaints did result in at least one violation by at least one officer. As you know, some of the cases have multiple policies being considered and multiple officers being considered for that. From October 2020, there's the cumulative through June 2022, Park has reviewed 284 cases involving 345 officers. And during that time period, there were 19 cases where the chief disagreed in part or in full with a park recommendation. But there was one instance where park found no violation and the chief found a violation. So that counts as a disagreement under our standard. The categories are pretty typical that y'all would have seen in the last quarterly reports. The pursuit policies, firearms violations, all of those. If anybody has any questions about any of those numbers, I'd be glad to take a question for that. And then finally, our recommendations to the chief of police. It's nice to go out on a high note where accenting or pointing out a positive rather than a negative. Our recommendation to the chief, which I think they've already been doing, is to see more public announcements on awards and commendations instead of just always pointing out the negatives, to also point out to the community some of the positive work that some of the individual officers do. So that's the quarterly report. Any questions for me on that?
I do have one line. Councilwoman Hill.
Thank you, Chair. As always, I appreciate the work that the Park Board does. I was really concerned about these behaviors as I saw them come across. I noticed the uptick. As I serve on school board, I'm always looking at the bullying report line by line and comparing month or quarter to quarter. You know, are we up? Are we down? And the violations that Park found related to improper procedure, insubordination, misrepresentation, pursuit policy, and unsatisfactory performance and untruthfulness, each were really concerning to me. So, Joda, at some point, I think it would be great to get some more feedback from our chief of police on, you know, what's happening. Was this just an isolated series of poor choices, or do we have something systemic that's bubbling up here? Thank you.
All right. Any other questions for Ms. Baker about the quarterly report? I'm not seeing any. Do you want to go into the changes that the committee is recommending? Maybe just a couple of highlights to point out for the council. Council, in your packet, you'll find a redlined version of the ordinance with the changes that's been proposed.
So I'm looking at the clean copy of the changes, not the full ordinance. So and these are just the changes that we had suggested. Under the purpose, section 1660, we removed the word citizen in front of complaints, just in case someone visiting Chattanooga had a bad experience. I think that was discussed previously. So this ordinance allows us to consider all complaints regardless of where the person might live. And we added was sworn officers. We had gotten a few, well, one or two that I can recall, cases against non-sworn employees of the police department that would normally be handled by HR. The front desk, the woman that works at the front desk at Amnicola, those types of cases. We wanted some clarification on from the council on whether you wanted us to review every single allegation of misconduct by every single employee, or focus our attention, which I think was the spirit of this ordinance, to sworn officers. So that's why we requested that clarification. In 1661, members of the committee, the only addition is actually all newly appointed committee members should attend committee meetings as soon as they are approved by city council. And what that means is that, once you're appointed by city council, you still have to go through the Citizens Police Academy. You still have to do 3 ride-alongs, and you still have to complete a legal training and a media type of training, as well as do a simulated training for shooting and not shooting, the situational training that we all went through. So, but as we found through the last 12 months, it's still important for the newly appointed members to attend the meetings, even if they can't vote, because then they understand what we're doing. And once they're able to vote, once they've done all those requirements, that there's not as big of a learning curve for them because they've been participating. And they're allowed to ask questions. They just can't vote until they've completed all the training. The third sentence, committee members may only vote after they have completed required training. That was already in there, but it was in another section where it didn't make sense. So we moved that to this section. Subsection E, the only addition is the word new before member, which was brought up in case if there was a new police chief and that police chief wanted, all the committee members to go run a marathon or something, related to training, not running a marathon. But those of us who had already gone through the training and were already members of PARC, we would not have to, we would be grandfathered in, basically. Now, I will say that I feel like the vibe of the group is that if a new chief felt like there was some additional training that would be beneficial to us, I feel pretty certain most of us would take advantage of that, to stay current with whatever is going on, maybe if there's trends that are being noticed. Under 1663, powers and duties of the chair, there was a section in there that required the chair to review files and to determine if they were complete or not. And if the chair didn't feel like they were complete, the chair would send it back to the police department to redo it. But that defeats the whole purpose of having a committee. And in another section of the ordinance, the entire committee is responsible for reviewing the cases. And if the committee feels like additional investigation needs to be done, that the entire committee would request that the police chief have additional investigation done. So I think that renumbered everything, and that's why most of the section is there. In section 4 of this amendment is under 1664, powers and duties of the committee. There was an additional in subsection C to indicate that we are making recommendations for enhanced training for sworn officers, not for the non-sworn employees. In subsection F, there was just a change to a reference to another section that was in error on the original right. And then in subsection G, that's where the committee, what I referenced earlier, where the committee reviews complaints, and we have 2 options. We can vote on our recommendation and submit it to the chief, or we can send it back to the chief requesting additional information. And then this section requires the chief to acknowledge the request within 30 days. And then if additional investigation is needed, they would do that and send the case back to us. And there might be instances where additional investigation can't be done. For instance, if the committee saw witnesses, that maybe there were 10 witnesses listed in the report, and we only saw statements from 8 of them, we might say, well, we want statements from the other 2 or updated statements. So we would send it back. But if those 2 witnesses had passed on or were deceased, they couldn't be re-interviewed. And so that could be a hypothetical that could occur where there wouldn't be an additional investigation because there's no one to interview. But if there is an additional investigation that can be done, they would do it, send it back to us, and then we would go through our normal process. And then finally, in section 5 of this amendment, section 1666 of the ordinance, the only addition was we added a possible recommendation by the committee, which is option number 5, no action, which is if we determine that the matter alleged is outside of the scope of our authority. And that was done because of some of those non-sworn cases that came before us. We didn't know if we were supposed to review them or not. So we wanted to have the option to make that determination based on the language of the ordinance.
All right. So great work on the part of the committee to come up with the recommendations to kind of help smooth out some of the maybe inaccuracies of the ordinance. Councilwoman Burrs?
Great work.
Thanks.
You've done a fabulous job, particularly with the fledgling weeks and months when everything was getting in shape. Who's going to be taking your place, Kay?
We had an election in the July meeting, and Marianne Hensley will be the new chair, and Dee Visser will be the vice chair.
Okay.
And I'm staying on as a voting member.
I saw that. Yeah.
So I'll still be around, but I just won't have to
Thank
come
you.
here.
Thank you for all the hard work.
You're welcome.
I really appreciate it. And I'm sure you'll have a lot to teach them. Thank you very much.
Thank you. You're welcome. Thank you.
All right. Any other questions or comments for Ms. Baker? If not, Ms. Baker, great job. Thank you for your dedication and making this board a success. And we appreciate all that you've done.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So council, I'm going to ask you the question, and since you're just seeing this, these are the recommendations of the park committee. Do you feel comfortable with going ahead and placing this on the agenda, or would you like some more time to review? What's your pleasure? Do what? You go? Okay. Madam Chair, Madam Chair, Madam Clerk, if you could put this on the 2-week agenda. Please, ma'am. All right. We also have a representative from the Fire and Police Pension Board to provide us with a year-to-date report. So we're going to ask Mr. Chris Hopkins, our council representative, to the board to come and give us the report. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. It's good to see you all again. Since I haven't been in front of you yet in 22, I thought I'd take 2 little pieces, look at 21, the full year, and then we'll circle back and talk about the bad news in 22, if you get my drift. The year 2021 was a good year for the fund. We had a gross investment return of 13.2%, and that put us in the top half of all public pension funds. So that was really good news. But just as a reminder, over the last 5 years, we have made a number of incremental changes that have improved not only the procedures, but also the investment performance of the fund. So I would direct your attention to the 4th column, the 3-year annualized performance of 11.4%, which puts us in the 27th percentile, or very close to the top quarter of all pension fund investment performance. So we're very proud of that. A lot of hard work on the part of our trustees as well as our investment consultants to do that. So we're very pleased with that number. I would highlight the end of 2021. The fund balance was $308 million. We broke the $300 million mark in the 3rd quarter and set a new record for assets at the end of the 4th quarter. So that's another great milestone. And then I would call your attention to the bottom of page 2, which is that our funded ratio for the pension fund percentage of the future obligations stood at the end of 2021 at 58.4%. Now, that is certainly lower than our target, but I will just to give you a sense of where we've come from. In the 2019 survey, that funded ratio was 46.5%. So that's a 25% increase in our funded ratio. That in and of itself, I think, is commendable. But I will add that the valuation that I'm presenting to you today, that 58.4% includes the approximately 25% pay increase to the sworn officers as a future liability. That obviously increased the pension obligation. That number is included in that funded ratio. And I would also add, for the benefit of Chairman Ledford, who's going to ask me, that's based on a 6.75% assumed rate of return, which is another quarter point decline, which now puts us slightly below the TCRS assumed rate. And again, that making every effort to make the investment returns realistic on our projections going forward. So a very, very good year in 2021 and the culmination of several years of hard work and, as I said, incremental changes. The first quarter of 2022, we had a gross return of minus 4.6%, which puts us just slightly below half of all of the public pension funds. We have very preliminary data for the second quarter. It takes a while for the investment funds to report their performance, and preliminarily that is a negative roughly 10.4% return. So it puts us around 14.5% negative total return for the year to date. Now, a little context, as of the end of the second quarter, the S&P 500 was down 21%, and even the aggregate bond index was down 11.5%. So there really wasn't any place to hide. And again, relative performance, we're kind of in the middle of the pack, very comfortable with our asset allocation as it stands right now. So I included some additional information in the packet. One thing that's worth observing, I think, on page 3 is the ratio of retired participants who are receiving benefits, the ratio of retirees to active participants 10 years ago was about 0.9%. Today, it's about 0.98%. So it's nearly a 1-for-1 ratio, one retiree for every active participant. That demonstrates of all public pension funds, as I think we're all well aware, but in particular with our first responders who had, on average, have a little bit earlier retirement dates. It's an additional challenge for us. So we're very proud of how the progress we've made. I do definitely want to thank all of the board members. Our board president, Lieutenant Joe Shaw, is here with us tonight. Our fund administrator, Katrina Abbott, who's done a tremendous job, was here earlier today. And then some of you may know Brent Goldberg. Brent also serves as the mayor's representative on our pension plan and has been a great addition, and his prior service brings a lot of experience to and perspective to the plan. I want to thank the council for their continued support of the pension plan. We know it's a big ask every year. We're still trying to overcome that really bad investment performance in 2008, and we're making consistent, steady progress, but it would not happen if it hadn't been for the commitment and dedication of the council, and we're very grateful. And then before I take questions, I did want to recognize, if he's still in the room, Deputy Chief back here, recently promoted Deputy Chief Nathan Vaughn, has been a member of our board, and due to his promotion has stepped aside, but Nathan's provided a tremendous service to the board. He's a thoughtful person. He has a great perspective. I have valued his counsel, and I appreciate his service and certainly congratulate him on his promotion. So I'd be happy to take any questions.
All right. Any questions for Mr. Hopkins before we turn him loose? No? I believe you must have done a great job, sir.
Well, we appreciate your support. We really do. Thank you.
All right. Is there anything else that needs to come before the Public Safety Committee? Mr. Chairman, I think that concludes everything on our agenda this afternoon. Is that correct? We are adjourned until 6 o'clock.